Have you ever felt like you're walking alone through an endless tunnel, where not even a spark seems to ignite? If you've ever felt like God was silent, like your prayers bounced off the ceiling, this story is for you. But before we begin, I invite you to subscribe if you believe that faith can transform even the most broken heart. Here, we share stories that touch the soul and awaken hope. Turn on the bell to not miss any of these stories that God can use to speak to you. Let's begin. It was night in Daniela's soul. And not just any night. It was the kind of darkness that even the dawn doesn't promise to dispel. She was 27, with a faded smile and a heart in pieces. Years ago, she had dreamed of serving God as a missionary, healing souls, bringing bread and the word, but now she could barely hold herself together. Her mother had just passed away, and the diagnosis was cruel and swift: terminal cancer. Her father was never there, and her faith, the one that once lit every corner of her life, now seemed like a damp match in the middle of a storm. "Where are you, God?" she whispered in the early hours. "Why don't you answer me?" Silence. It was all silence. Daniela worked cleaning in a small neighborhood hospital, and although physical exhaustion wore her down, the heaviest weight was within her. Every night when she left, she would pass by a closed church. She'd stop for a moment, look at the cross high above, and cry. She cried without words, because sometimes, when the soul doesn't find answers, all it can do is cry. But what Daniela didn't know was that God had already started writing the greatest miracle of her life. Have you ever felt like Daniela? Write in the comments. I too walked in the shadow, if this story has already begun to touch your heart. That night, like so many others, Daniela left the hospital dragging her feet. Her shoes were soaked from the rain, and her soul even more so. The sky cried with her, as if the entire world understood her mourning. As she walked on the slippery sidewalk, something different happened. Passing in front of the church, the same one she passed every night, she saw a small light shining on the altar through the side stained glass window. The main door, for the first time in weeks, was slightly open. She hesitated. Should I go in? And for what? She said to herself. What am I coming for? To speak to someone who no longer listens to me. But her steps, as if guided by an invisible whisper, crossed the threshold. Inside, an elderly man was sweeping slowly. Noticing her presence, he lifted his gaze and smiled, as if he already knew she was coming. Good evening, daughter. God was waiting for you. Daniela felt a shiver. No one had called her daughter since her mother passed away. No one seemed to see what she carried. But this man did. I just wanted to be here for a moment. I expect nothing. Just silence, she said, her voice broken. The old man nodded gently. Then you've come to the right place. Here, even silence speaks to God. She sat in the last pew. The temple was almost empty, but something began to fill her from the inside. It wasn't joy. It was comfort. A warm comfort, like a blanket over her wounded soul. And then, for the first time in a long time, she didn't ask for anything. She just closed her eyes and let the tears speak. Has it ever happened to you that someone said exactly what you needed to hear without you asking for it? Write in the comments. God spoke to me in the silence, if you've ever felt that way. And if this story is touching your soul, don't forget to subscribe to keep receiving these messages that illuminate the shadow. The clock struck 10:47 p.m. Daniela sat in silence while the rain gently hit the stained glass windows of the temple. She felt a strange peace, as if the pain had finally found a place to rest. The elderly man, who continued sweeping with a patience that seemed heavenly, approached slowly. He had tired eyes, but they were bright, and his voice was soft, like a prayer. Sometimes God doesn't respond with words, he said, without her asking anything. Sometimes he simply sits with us in the shadow. Daniela looked at him, surprised. How did he know exactly what she was feeling? Who are you? She asked cautiously. The man smiled. A soul that also walked in darkness. And I learned that before receiving the light, the soul must learn to walk in the shadow. Her heart trembled at his words. But it hurts, she murmured. I feel like I'll never get out of this. I lost my mom. I lost my faith, and I don't know how to keep going. The old man sat next to her, without invading her space, just being there. Your mom hasn't gone, Daniela. Love doesn't die, it just changes form. And faith, sometimes faith falls to the ground, but God has hands to lift it up. She couldn't hold back her tears. It was as if that man had picked up every broken piece of her soul, one by one. And how does one start to believe again? She asked, sobbing. The old man looked at her with infinite tenderness. With small steps, sometimes all it takes is to open your heart and let God in, even if it's just through a crack. Have you ever felt like you didn't have the strength to go on, but someone showed up with exactly what you needed? Right. God always arrives on time. In the comments if you've ever experienced that. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story if you feel someone else needs to hear it. In the following days, Daniela returned to the church every night after work. Not out of habit, but out of necessity. That door, once closed, was now always slightly open. And every time she entered, the elderly man was there, as if he had never left. Today, I brought something for you, he said one night, extending a simple notebook. It's your new beginning. Daniela took it with curiosity. A journal? No, it's a notebook of encounters. Here, you will write every moment when you see a glimpse of God, no matter how small. She hesitated. I don't know if I'll see anything. You will, the old man replied firmly. But first, you must learn to look differently. Sometimes the miracle isn't that the pain disappears, but that we learn to walk with it without it breaking us. That night, Daniela went home with the notebook under her arm. And when she arrived, she opened it. She didn't write anything, but she left one blank page with a single word in the center. Here I am, God. That was her first prayer in weeks. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a complaint. It was a surrender. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, she was able to sleep without crying. Do you remember the first time you spoke to God again after a period of silence? Right. Here I am, God, in the comments if the story resonates with your heart. And if you want to write your own encounters with Him, get a notebook and start today. Sometimes, faith begins with a blank page. Subscribe to follow this story of transformation and hope. The week passed slowly, but something had changed. Daniela continued living in the same gray city, with the same problems, the same stained hospital uniform, but her gaze was no longer the same. Every night she wrote in the notebook, at first just scattered phrases. Today, a patient thanked me. The coffee was hot, just when I needed it most. I saw a child laugh in the middle of the hospital hallway. Small glimpses, tiny lights, but lights nonetheless. And the more she wrote, the more her soul opened. She began to notice that God hadn't abandoned her, but had been in the details, in the silent comfort, in the constant presence of that elderly man. One rainy night, Daniela entered the church soaked. The elderly man was waiting for her with a blanket. Today, I saw a lady praying for her sick son, Daniela said, while drying her hair. She wasn't pleading desperately. She prayed with confidence. How do you get to that point? The elderly man looked at her with tenderness. Trust doesn't come in sunny days, daughter. It's forged in the storm. God doesn't want you to pretend everything is fine. He wants you to learn to trust even when everything seems lost. Daniela took a deep breath. Sometimes trusting scares me. It's like letting go of the edge of the abyss. It is, he replied. But the beautiful thing is that when you let go, you discover that you're not falling. You're being held. And in that instant, for the first time in a long time, Daniela smiled. Not because everything was okay, but because she was starting to believe that one day it would be. Have you ever had moments when you discovered God in the small details? Right. I saw God in the simple. If you've ever felt that in your life, like if this story is touching your heart, and share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Subscribe so we can continue growing in faith together. One Friday afternoon, Daniela arrived at the church with a firmer step than usual. She had a folded letter in her hand and the notebook was already full of pages. The elderly man greeted her with a different smile, as if he knew that tonight would be special. Today I'm not here to ask, nor to cry, Daniela said as she sat down. Today I'm here to give thanks. The elderly man nodded. Tell me, my soul still hurts, but I've learned to walk with it. I no longer drag the weight. I'm not afraid of the darkness anymore. I know that the light dwells within me, even when I can't see it. She handed him the notebook. He opened it and ran his fingers over the handwritten phrases. Each page was a testimony. Each word, a step in the shadow toward faith. And the letter? He asked gently. Daniela took a deep breath. It's for my mom. I wrote everything I couldn't tell her when she was alive. I don't want my words to remain trapped in pain. The elderly man carefully took the letter, as if it were sacred. Then today is the day when the shadow stops being a punishment and becomes the path. They walked together to the garden behind the temple. There, next to a small wooden cross, Daniela folded the letter and buried it under a flower she had planted weeks before. She didn't cry. She didn't break down. She simply closed her eyes and surrendered her soul to peace. Do you have words hidden in your heart that you need to release? Write in the comments. Today I let go of my pain and take that step of faith. Sometimes, writing a letter to heaven is the beginning of healing. Subscribe if you're learning to walk through the shadow, knowing that God is guiding you toward the light. The days turned into weeks, and Daniela was no longer the same. Her eyes still carried stories, but no longer of defeat, but of resurrection. One ordinary afternoon, she arrived at the church and found something she didn't expect. The elderly man was no longer there. Neither his broom, nor his blanket, not even the teacups he used to prepare. She searched every corner. She asked the priest, "The elderly man who was always cleaning here?" She asked urgently. The priest looked at her, surprised. "No one has been here in weeks, daughter. No one else has keys except for me. And you." Daniela's soul trembled, not out of fear, but out of certainty. She returned to her usual bench. She opened her notebook, and on the last page, written in a handwriting that wasn't hers, she read, "Now you know how to walk. The light is already in you. We will meet again. When the sky embraces you." Her eyes filled with tears, but not of sadness. It was a different kind of cry, a cry of fulfillment. Sometimes, angels don't come down from heaven with wings. Sometimes they simply sweep the floor of an abandoned church, and they teach you to walk when you thought you could never do so again. Daniela closed the notebook and went out into the garden. The sun, for the first time in a long time, was shining without hiding. And as she walked among the flowers she had watered herself, she understood. Not all miracles are seen. Some are only felt. If God has ever sent you someone at the perfect moment, comment, "Angels exist. This story is coming to an end, but your journey with God is just beginning." Subscribe if you believe in hidden miracles and the people who save us without us knowing. Daniela kept going to church, but now she no longer sought desperate answers, rather moments of silence to listen to what her soul already knew. She had learned that faith was not a goal, nor a bright light that solved everything instantly. It was a serene walk in the middle of the night, with the certainty that dawn will come. Her life didn't become perfect. There were still heavy shifts. There were still cloudy days, but her spirit no longer walked alone. One day, a new young nurse arrived at the hospital. She saw her sitting in the locker room, crying silently. Daniela approached, sat next to her, and without saying a word, she offered her a small notebook. On the cover, handwritten, it read, "Encounters with God." The girl looked at her, confused. "And what am I supposed to write here?" Daniela smiled, with the peace of someone who has already walked through the valley of shadow and has come out the other side. "Start with this. I am here, God. That's enough. He will do the rest." That day, Daniela understood the deepest truth, that the light she once received in her darkness now belonged to the world. And so, without announcement, the soul that learned to walk in the shadow became a beacon for others. Did this story touch you? Right. I also want to be light. If you desire to be an instrument of hope for others, remember, your story can heal someone. Don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe God uses every shadow to prepare a light. Thank you for making it this far. See you in the next story of faith, love, and hidden miracles. God is already working in you, even if you don't see it yet.